In the Avatar series, the water tribes could have been placed anywhere to live that was water, but instead the writers put them in glaciers. And I don't think that was an accidental choice. I think the ice tells us something profound about how the series understands emotion. Today, we're going to explore why the glaciers might be a symbol of emotional protection, who or what they might be protecting, and my personal favorite, why ice bending might be an overlooked symbol in the Avatar. So I started with the question, why are most of the water tribes only located at the North and South poles? I know that it's not exactly like our world, but still, the poles are kind of similar. So it made me question what the glaciers represent for the Water Kingdom, especially because the first thing we see are glaciers, and the very first episode's name has the word iceberg in it. So I thought there must be some kind of symbolism embedded in this, because out of all the places they could have lived, they're surrounded by ice. And then that made me wonder, what does the ice actually represent? Well, there's a well-known understanding in symbology that water can represent our emotions. Knowing that means waterbenders must be in tune with their emotions in order to attack with water. So that's what made me ask, what do glaciers and coldness represent emotionally for waterbenders? And why would the water tribes need to live on ice and in the cold specifically instead of other areas of water? As I started thinking about what the glaciers could represent, I found myself coming back to one idea, and that's that the glaciers are a form of protection. That symbology actually serves them in two ways, where the glaciers and coldness are actually the first visible, consistent, external reminder that the water tribes need in order to have structure and protection to thrive. They not only literally stand and live on ice, which is a symbolic structure for their nation's solidarity, but it's also a massive physical barrier to any intruders. And we see this here in the siege on the North Pole, where the Fire Nation actually has a hard time infiltrating their area. But secondly, I believe that they serve as an internal reminder that waterbenders need to control their emotions before bending. This is also a form of protection. So from here, I delved even deeper because the symbol of protection immediately raised another question for me. So I thought, okay, but why does the water tribe need these types of internal emotional protections? Who or what are they protecting? And I actually think they're primarily protecting themselves with these symbols of ice and coldness. We can see this in the scene where Katara breathes before bending. At the same time, Sokka is admiring his reflection in the water. I think this highlights that when Katara does take the time to breathe before waterbending, she succeeds. But ultimately, the argument that breaks out from this scene is ironically very symbolic of how their points of view were very separated, and they were at odds with one another, and therefore the ice breaks. It's as if they momentarily lost that solidarity that their tribes are so well known for. Another example is after their boat breaks, we see that Katara loses emotional control of herself and accidentally breaks the iceberg as well. This is not the first time that we see Katara becoming overwhelmed or losing control of her emotions, and she actually has quite a bit of attachment to her reactions and her identity. We also see this comparison when Paku remains completely composed during his fight with her, which ultimately ends with Katara being trapped by ice in a fit of rage. Alright, so now we've reached my final question, which was if ice bending is low-key overlooked as a symbol in the Avatar. So while I was thinking about all this ice bending, I noticed something that completely changed the way I saw the element of water and how it compares to the element of air. I thought, okay, since the element of air is also just as permeable as water, do airbenders have this sort of thing that protects them? Do they have an equivalent to ice? And I realized, yeah, okay, sure, air is permeable, but airbenders still are able to detach from their own identity, thoughts, and emotions. The invisible space that they need, or their detachment from these things, is actually what makes them able to not take on the thoughts and emotions of others as well. And I believe that is the reason why the air nomads' temples are built so high. The space they create with these high temples is probably a symbolic representation of the space and distance they need in order to detach and bend properly. without the influence of others on their psyche, and even without the influence of their own thoughts and emotions on their bending and psyches. It's in this way that I believe ice is a physical representation of the waterbenders' version of needing to detach from their own permeability. Because water basically moves and exists through like osmosis and permeability. So the glaciers and ice are not just a physical blockade. I actually think they represent the water tribe's ability to create their own solid foundation in order to detach from their own identities, their own emotions, and even the emotions of others long enough for them to waterbend effectively. Now, whether that symbolism was intentional or not, we don't know. But I think it's a fascinating way to look at the water tribes. And secretly, to me, the glaciers aren't just a place where the water tribes happen to live. I think they become part of the philosophy of waterbending itself. Instead of seeing ice as just frozen water, I started seeing it as a symbol of discipline, like a kind of psychological distance and emotional protection that waterbenders need to keep, not only from the outside world, but from their own emotional attachments and reactions that reiterate their identity of who they are. Now, before we end this video, I just want to leave you with one final question. And it kind of made me rethink the role of ice completely for the water tribes. And my theory comes from our knowledge that we already know the original waterbenders learned waterbending from the moon, right? But I wonder if the glaciers became teachers too, not by showing them how to move the water, but by teaching them emotional discipline and solidarity. Similar to how the Badger Moles taught earthbending, I secretly think the glaciers taught the water tribes the discipline for ice bending. Now, I know that's not in any of the episodes, and whether the writers intended that or not is probably debatable. But it's questions like these that make the Avatar so fascinating to me. So I just wanted to share that with you all, and that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye. Ciao, ciao.